Well, here we are, our final session with our tactics training. It's been a lot of fun for me. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. This last session is going to teach you a very, very important tactic that you're going to need to defend yourself against a certain type of person. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But first, I'd like to talk about what we covered last session, okay? We learned the basics of a tactic that I call taking the roof off. It's one I got from Francis Schaeffer. He's the one who actually named it. There are 3 steps to this tactic. First, we accept the other person's point of view, their basic viewpoint or their basic view or argument. For the sake of argument, we acknowledge it. We say, okay, if that's true, then what? We then give the idea a mental test drive, okay? We see where it would logically lead to see if there's any absurd consequences that result when the view is applied consistently, okay? And if there are absurd consequences that maybe that person isn't aware of, we take the roof off. We remove their protection, and we invite them to consider the implications of their own view. And we also learned a little bit about why this tactic works. And this is a concept from Schaeffer that has helped me in a lot of other areas. That human beings actually are made in the image of God, and they actually do live in the world that God created. And that means that everyone who denies the fact of Christianity and the Christian worldview will have views that also contradict reality, which creates a problem for them. They're living in a world that is one way, but they have beliefs that say something else. And so there's going to be a point of tension when those beliefs they have and reality collide with each other. And part of your job using the taking the roof off tactic is to cause those things to collide, to help them to see that they cannot live out their view given the way the world actually is. And that oftentimes they're borrowing from our worldview in order to make points that are inconsistent with their own. So we remove the roof, the shield that they've erected to protect themselves from the logical implications of their beliefs, and we deprive them of this false sense of security that they have. That's taking the roof off. And when we do it, we always try to use, questions whenever we can do that. Today I want to teach you a defensive tactic. I'll call it Steamroller. Steamroller is a tactic that will help you handle one of the most difficult kinds of people that you run into. So here's what we're going to do. First, I will teach you how to recognize a steamroller, and I guarantee you that is not hard. Second, I want to teach you 3 basic steps that you can use to help you kind of stop a steamroller and hopefully put you back in control of the conversation, okay? Steamrollers are the hardest kinds of people for me to deal with. I'll just tell you, if I ever break my rule about getting angry, if I get mad, I lose. Well, sometimes I break my rule, not on purpose, but I get mad. It's usually because I'm dealing with a steamroller. So sometimes they're really hard to deal with. But if you do not deal with the steamroller, you will get nowhere else in the conversation. And in fact, even after you do deal with them, you'll see you might not get anywhere else. But at least now we have a way to deal with them, and I'll share that with you. Simply put, steamrollers are people who overwhelm you. All right? They have strong opinions. They have strong personalities. And they mean to keep you off balance and on the defensive by overpowering you with a lot of attitude and a lot of noise, okay? Their words come fast and furious, and they keep you from collecting your thoughts. You can't catch your wits and answer in a thoughtful manner. And they have one defining characteristic. They interrupt constantly. They will cut you off before you can respond to the challenge. As you're trying to respond to the challenge, in the middle of your answer, they'll take you in a totally different direction. They'll find something they don't like in your explanation. They'll jump right in and then pile on more challenges. And then you end up following the second or the third or the fourth challenge, but that doesn't work because they're going to interrupt you and stop you and send you in another direction. You'd never get anything done. They change the subject. They overwhelm you with all kinds of attitude and all kinds of noise, and they never listen to anything you have to say. Now, if this description sounds familiar, I bet you've been steamrollered. Some of you are married to steamrollers, That could be really rough. But the technique I'm going to teach you to deal with the steamroller works with anyone, all right? Here's one of the problems with dealing with a steamroller. Steamrollers are insincere people. That is, they know it's easier to ask the hard questions than it is to listen to the hard answers. The questions can come fast. The answers sometimes are slower because they're more involved. You have to cover more ground with them. And these are people who do not want to wait and listen because they don't really want an answer. What they want to do is just make you look foolish, overpower you, okay? They're not interested in answers. They're interested in winning through power and intimidation. Now, every once in a while, you'll run into somebody that I call a benevolent steamroller. That is, they're not really mean or nasty. They're just overly excitable, and they just can't wait to get into play. And they're not listening to you. They're thinking about what they want to say, and once you stop talking, boom, they're jumping in, or maybe they're cutting you off. And so they're still hard to deal with, but they're not quite as difficult as the other time. And there is a way to deal with steamrollers. There are 3 steps for dealing with them. I'll tell you quickly what they are, and then I'll explain them. You stop them, you shame them, or finally, you leave them. Okay? Now, these are progressive steps, and the point is that if you do the first step and it works to stop the steamroller, you don't have to go any further. If the first step doesn't work, you go to the second step. If you can't stop them, then you shame them. And if neither of those work and they keep rolling over the top of you, you leave them. That's the idea, all right? So let's look at the first step. When somebody begins to steamroll you, interrupt you while you're talking, the best thing you can do is to try to stop them graciously but firmly and in a very modest way negotiate an agreement. And many times that's all you need to do to be able to move forward. And I find myself, when I'm in stage 1, that I actually use a little body English, so I hold my hand up. So we're talking together, and as I'm trying to respond, they jump right in. And I'll say, wait just a minute. I'm not quite finished yet. I'll give you a chance to jump in. Let me finish my thought. Is that all right? You notice how friendly that was, how kind of easy it was. I'm smiling when I say it. I say at the end, is that all right? I put my hand up a little bit. I'm not being really mean and gruff. Will you please let me finish? No, that's not going to work, all right? You just do that simple thing. Oh, hold on just a minute. I'm not quite finished yet. I'll let you talk in a second. And this I'll let you talk in a second is really valuable and helpful because you're letting them know they'll have their turn, okay? But you need to finish up what you have to say to make the point that answers whatever their challenge is, and then you give the floor back to them. I would say probably 85% of the time when you have a steamroller, and this is especially true with a benevolent steamroller, not really mean, but just overly excitable, that's all that you're going to need to do. And with the benevolent steamrollers, I say, hey, hold on just a second. I'm not quite finished. And they go, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, and they're all excited because they want to jump in. I say, yeah, but you got to slow down a little bit and be sure you're listening to what I say, okay? All right, here's what I have to say, and then it'll be your turn. That's all it takes. Okay, so that's step number 1. Very, very simple, very straightforward, easy to do. Now, keep in mind, you have to keep your cool when this happens because I think the first response that I feel, and most people feel when they're cut off, is defensive and aggressive, okay? We might say, hold on just for a minute. I need a little bit more time. You asked a good question. You deserve an answer. Are you interested in what I have to say? That kind of thing, So you might spread it out a little bit, but it's just an appeal for enough courtesy to let you finish your point, and then it's their turn, okay? Now, if the steamroller is especially aggressive, sometimes it's best just to stop talking for a few moments and just calmly wait for a clear opening. What you don't want to do is you don't want to talk over them. If he's not cooperating, just let him go, okay? So basically, you're asking him to give you something, which is patience, so that you can give him something in return, and that's a response to his question or to his challenge, okay? So that's the way this is working. So, for example, You might say, is it okay with you if I take a few moments to answer your concerns or your questions before you ask another question? Is that okay with you? Because I need some time. I'll give you a chance to respond when I get done. Or you might say, I know you have a lot of questions, but I need a moment to explain myself. Is that okay? Or you might say something like, let me respond to your first challenge. When I'm done, you can jump in again. Is that all right with you? Or you might say, that's a good question and it deserves a decent answer. I need a moment to give you one. Is that okay? Notice that I'm asking for permission every single time. That is, I negotiate an agreement to let me talk before he talks again, and I ask him if that's okay. And if he says, yeah, that's okay, well, now you've done your job and you can respond. But be sure to respond adequately to the first issue, to one issue, before you're forced to tackle another. And this is what I mean about the insincerity that you run into with Steamroller sometimes. They're not listening. They just want to bam, 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 and throw this out. And so you got to slow them down. You got to stop them. That's the first step. You stop them and you negotiate. And then, will that work out for you? Okay. Doesn't have to be long. Could be just a few seconds like I showed you. And once you've made your point, you can ask him to acknowledge the point you made. So you give him the point and you could say, okay, is that a fair answer to your question? Or does that sound plausible to you? You see, there's no sense going further with a bunch more questions if he isn't willing to give consideration to this first thing. Now, it might be that you do the best you can and the guy says, you know what, that doesn't satisfy me, but it looks like we're going to disagree on this, so let's just move on to something else. Fine. You do the best that you can. You're not going to satisfy everybody in this kind of conversation. Also, don't take unfair advantage of the time that you buy when you're talking with him about this. Get the opportunity, make your point, let him back into the conversation. Remember, steamrollers are people who have a hard time waiting. So you're asking him to do something against his nature by not jumping in on you, so keep that in mind. And do not become a steamroller yourself, all right? Give the other side a fair chance to make their point, to offer their reply before you jump in again. I find myself, I've been doing this a long time, I find myself still having the tendency to jump in when I hear something that I know I can respond to. Instead, I've got to settle back, take a breath, and listen. Pay attention. Make sure I understand their view correctly. Even give it a beat after they're done talking so they're finished their comment. I'm not laying on top of them right at the end of their comment. I'm coming in a little bit more slowly. I'm pausing. Whenever you pause like that after they've spoken, it reinforces for them that you're taking their point of view seriously, all right? So that's the first step. You stop them. Negotiate a little thing with them that allows you to finish your point before they jump in, and then you pass the ball to them, so to speak, okay? Sometimes that doesn't work. And so what you have to do is go to step 2. If you can't stop them, then you have to shame them. And what I mean by shaming them is that you pretty much do the same kind of thing that you've done in the first step, but you're addressing the impolite behavior in a more direct fashion. So if you try step 1 and the steamroller breaks trust with you, with your first agreement, or maybe you can't even succeed in stopping him briefly to negotiate with him at all, you got to be more aggressive. Steamrollers are aggressive. You must be more aggressive too. And what you do is you shame him by being direct and asking very explicitly for courtesy in your conversation. Now, make sure you're calm when you do. You don't want to come across harsh or angry. It will do you no good if you are condescending at this point. Take a deep breath, let them finish their point, and then first, just ignore the challenge, all right? That's not your problem right now. The problem is the way the conversation is going. Don't follow the rabbit trails. How many he has put before you, regardless, just let it go. Instead, you want to address the steamroller problem directly. And you might say something like this: I need to know if you really want an answer from me. Now, I assume you asked the question because you wanted a response. I could be wrong about that. You keep on interrupting me. So which is it? Do you want an answer or not? You wait now for an affirmation. You might put it this way. Could I ask you a favor? I'd love to respond to your concern, but I can't because you keep interrupting me. Do you think I could have a few moments to develop my point without being cut off here? And then, hey, you can tell me what you think. That's all right. I don't mind hearing from you. I just want to be able to make my case here. Is that okay with you? And then you wait for a response. Or you might say, can I ask you a quick question? I need to know whether you want an answer to your challenge or if you just want to talk. When you keep interrupting me, I get the feeling you don't want to have a dialogue, you don't want to answer, you just want to talk. Well, that's okay, I'm a good listener. Fine, just let me know what it's going to be. What do you want? I need to know that before I can continue this conversation, and then wait for an answer. I remember one time I was having a conversation, I was in India, and one of the Christians brought a friend of theirs to me that they wanted to have me talk with about Christianity. This person was an energetic type, really talkative, and he was a steamroller. And what happened is, the more that they talked, I should put it this way, the more that I tried to talk, the more they kept interrupting me. And finally, I just sat there quietly. And they talked, and they talked, and they talked, and then they stopped. And when they were done, I said, thanks. And then I got up to walk out. And they were they were really surprised that I was doing. They said, what are you doing? Where are you going? I said, well, I kept trying to answer your questions. You kept interrupting me. And I suddenly realized this person doesn't want answers. They just want to talk. And I said, okay, I'm a good listener. I can listen. And so I did. And now I listened. And now you're done talking. Now I'm leaving. Well, that's pretty aggressive. But it needed to be aggressive with this individual, because if I didn't act this aggressively, I would not have had an opportunity to communicate my point. And so when I want to get really, really bold, when it's necessary, it's not what I want, it's the circumstance, I might say something like this. Look, here's what I have in mind. Hold on. Here's what I have in mind. How about you ask your question, you make your point, I'll listen. When you're done, I'll respond, and you won't interrupt me. And when I'm done, it will be my turn to be polite and let you have your say. Now, I need to know if that's okay with you, because if it isn't, then this conversation is over. What would you like to do? And then you wait for a response. You see, if you had started that way, you can see that would be way, way too aggressive. But if you go through the first step and they break trust with you, and then now you're at the second step, and you're going to, if you don't do this with some people, forget about it. It's over with. At some point, the direct approach is the only thing that will save a conversation. Remember, steamrollers are strong, they're aggressive, and sometimes they have to be answered in kind. What I mean by in kind in strength and aggressiveness, not in rudeness, all right? So when that happens and you get some cooperation on this, you can return to the steamroller's original challenge, or maybe any particular challenge that they brought out, but just work with one is the point. And then you address that one thing. So you might say, well, now your challenge, as I understand it, see, now you bought the time, you shamed them. So your challenge is, as I understand it, this, and then you repeat the question. So here's how I'd like to respond, and then you give your response. Once you're done, you let the other person back in. So you keep your word, all right? And again, I just want to emphasize, don't be snippy, don't be smug. Just stay focused, stay pleasant, stay gracious, stay in control. Again, you may have to take a deep breath. Okay, fine. And this, by the way, is a difficult tactic to employ because you're working against your emotions when you have to confront a steamroller, all right? I understand that. It's going to take some practice, but I'm telling you, This really works. And if you listen to the radio show that I've been doing for many, many years now, you'll notice sometimes I get a steamroller, and then you can see me putting my 1, 2, and in a moment 3-step method into play, and how effective it is to stop the steamroller, take control of the conversation, and do something productive in the conversation. So I mentioned first you stop them and negotiate. If that doesn't work, then you shame them. All right? What if that doesn't work? If stopping them doesn't work, shaming them doesn't work, then you leave them. In other words, you don't go any further in the conversation. When all else fails, you walk away. If he won't let you answer, if he won't listen politely until he's finished, then drop it. You might let him have the satisfaction of having the last word, then walk away. Wisdom dictates, in my view at least, not wasting time with this kind of fool. Let me tell you something that happened to me just a few weeks ago, actually. It was a terrible steamroller incident by a Christian. I was having this conversation with him, and he was confronting me on a particular view that he held that I didn't hold, and so he's challenging me with questions about my view, and so I'm trying to respond, and every single time that I started to give a response, he would cut me off. And so I tried to do steamroller number 1. I couldn't do that because he was too aggressive. I had to go right away to steamroller number 2. And when I did that, he cut me off again. In other words, right when I'm trying to say, hold on just a minute, I'm trying to answer your question, but you're not really giving me an opportunity to answer it. You keep interrupting me. Do you want an answer or don't you want an answer? I'd be glad to give you an answer, then you can jump in. I mean, that's what I wanted to say, but I got halfway through saying that, and he interrupted me. And I said, look, you're even interrupting me when I'm asking you not to interrupt me. And I realized that this is one of those situations that was never going to go right. He would not stop interrupting, no matter what I said. So I never could get any ideas out on the table for him to consider. And I realized in this circumstance, there's no sense going any further. And I just put up my hands and I just said, I can't continue in this conversation. That's it. And I told him why, because you keep interrupting, and I turned and walked away. And as I was walking away, he was still firing shots at me. That's how bad it was. I think the last thing he said to me, because I was going to give him the last word, right? And he said, you should go back and to your room and get down on your knees and repent from your sin and pray to God, that something like that, because my view, he saw, was a terrible sin. Anyway, it was awful. And I felt really bad afterwards. And sometimes this is just the way it goes. I mean, life is not tidy, and sharing your convictions with someone, even a Christian, is not going to be tidy. And sometimes you're going to run into steamrollers, and you're going to have to deal with the steamrollers. Listen, Jesus said, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls before swine, that kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying people are dogs or swine. That is what Jesus had in mind. He's using a metaphor here. And there's sometimes the circumstance is such, and the thing that you have to give is so valuable, it does not make any sense at all to keep feeding this to somebody who's not going to treat it with respect. Okay? Now, how do you know when that happens? Well, he made a comment there about lest they turn and tear you to pieces and trample under feet the holy thing. So look, when you're in a conversation and the person you're talking to is about to trample under feet or is doing this trampling of the valuable thing that you're telling them, and they're about to tear you to pieces, that's the time where you realize, end of discussion, okay? That's the time where you call it quits with that individual. You don't have to fire a final shot over the bow. You don't have to make a smart aleck comment. You just simply say, well, this is really not going anywhere, and I don't think it's going to be helpful to pursue it any further. Or you could say, I'll let you have the last word. Or you might say, we'll just agree to disagree. But the whole point is you're cutting yourself off from the conversation. Now, steamrollers may not let you go. Just like this other guy wasn't going to let me go. And I had to just turn my back and walk away. That will happen maybe 2% of the time, 2 to 5% of the time when you're dealing with a steamroller. Most of the time, The technique that I just taught you is going to work, even with your spouse, okay? But you have to be really careful to be really polite. I want you to do that in every circumstance, but you better do it if it's with your spouse, okay? A whole lot more is at stake. Because you can walk away from the discussion, but you can't walk away from the relationship, all right? So what did we learn in this session? We learned a defensive tactic called Steamroller. We first learned how to recognize that, which that's not hard because steamrollers overpower you with strong personalities and they interrupt all the time. I mean, that's basically it. Next, we learned 3 steps to deal with a steamroller and put you back in control of the conversation. First, we said stop him. Okay? You stop him gently, graciously, but firmly, and negotiate a quick agreement that he not speak until you're finished, okay? And that usually works. If that doesn't work, you go to step 2. You shame them. That is, you do the same thing as the first step, but you address in a very direct way the rudeness, really, and you make a request for courtesy, okay? And there's lots of different ways that I role model that for you. If you can't stop them, and if you can't shame them, then you leave them. Let them have the last word, then you walk away. That is going to be the best way to deal with that kind of steamroller. Now, I think what we've done, I just want to look for a moment over the last few sessions, the weeks that we've had together. I made a promise to you that I'd give you a game plan that would allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you think you know, or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. And I provided that for you in our first 3 sessions. It's the Columbo game plan. That is, we use questions to move through conversations. And when I say game plan, I mean that quite literally. That is, when I get into an encounter or a situation where I want to have a spiritual impact on somebody's life, I think first, what? Gather information. So I'm going to ask questions to gather information. The key question there, the model question, is what do you mean by that? It's especially helpful when people are making challenges to you of a spiritual nature and raising objections of some sort. What do you mean by that? And for every ambiguity, you want to get clarification, okay? The second step in our game plan is to reverse the burden of proof, all right? So if somebody makes a claim, they're the one who bears the burden of proof. We're not going to try to disprove their view. We want them first to offer evidence in favor of the point that they're trying to make before we go after it. And we use some form of the question, now how did you come to that conclusion? And then the third use of Columbo is if we can go further in the conversation, if we have a point that we want to make in a positive way, if we see a weakness or a flaw, then we're going to use questions to make our point or use questions to exploit the weakness or the flaw. And if we can get a bunch of pieces on the table from them by asking them questions first that help us to make our point, all the better. Okay? That's the game plan. That was our first 3 sessions. Then we talked about 2 different tactics that will allow us to recognize the flaw. The tactic suicide was used to help us to recognize when some points of view just self-destruct. And they destroy themselves, so all you have to do is recognize it, and that's the key. Recognizing when a view is self-contradictory, and then you point it out, and if you can point it out using questions, all the better. The second way that we discovered that we could expose a weakness or a flaw, or another way of saying it is a second way that a point of view can go bad, involves the taking the roof off tactic. That is, if you take the point of view seriously and agree with it for the sake of discussion, and you give it a test drive and see where it goes, if it ends up someplace absurd or bizarre or radically immoral, then there's probably something wrong with where they started. And in this particular case, you want to show them the consequences of the belief that they have if they hold it consistently. You remove the protective cover, the roof, that's helped them to stay clear of the natural consequences of their own view. And then you encourage them to consider maybe starting from a different point, a different worldview, dropping that particular view that they have, okay? Finally, we talked about a defensive tactic, and that tactic is the steamroller tactic, and we've talked about that at length here in this session. I just want to offer you a final challenge. I mentioned at the beginning of our sessions together that this is a course that could be a game changer for you. I know that because it's been a game changer for me and for so many other people that have told me the very thing, that it's changed everything for them. I hope that you haven't been just following the sessions passively, but you've actually been starting to put these things into practice. And if you don't put them into practice, they will not help you. Okay? You can join a health club. You'll never get better. You never get healthier. You never lose any weight if you don't go. All right? Same thing with this. You can learn all this stuff. If you don't start putting it into play, it's not going to help you one bit. But if you do put it into play, you are going to be amazed at how effective these tactics, the general tactical approach, will be in helping you to maneuver in conversations. So I want you to study the tactics. I want you to know the truth. If you're going to defend the truth tactically, you got to know what the truth is. So that's another element here. I want to encourage you to get out of your comfort zone. I realize it's not easy to engage people on spiritual topics. Look, I get it. But you will not find an easier way to do it than what I've just taught you. I promise you. And in the process, you can trust that the Holy Spirit is going to use you if you step forward. We don't know how that's going to be. We don't know when it's going to happen. But the Holy Spirit has an amazing way of taking whatever it is that we offer, even if it's just a stone in somebody's shoe, and using it in powerful ways in their lives. So don't be discouraged by appearances. Oh, that guy would never want to listen. Oh, that person is probably an atheist, or that person would never consider anything I have to say. Even if they push back on you hard, you never know what God is doing in their lives. And the other thing that I want you to do is I want you to commit yourself to be a good ambassador for Christ, okay? An ambassador, knowledge, wisdom, character. Knowledge, an accurately informed mind. Wisdom, an artful method, tactics. Character is an attractive manner. I want you to work at representing Christ in a winsome and an attractive fashion. And if you do that, I promise you, God and the power of the Holy Spirit will use what you put out there for Him. There is a kind of battle out there, and there are casualties. If you prepare properly, and these tactics will are part of that preparation, if you step out, if you trust God to work, you won't be one of the casualties. You'll be one of the people that makes a difference, that bears fruit that remains. That's my prayer. Anytime I go out to engage somebody else, I hope that's your prayer as well. And I also hope that what I've offered you in these 6 sessions will help you to accomplish that very thing. I'm Greg Kokel for Stand to Reason.